next step that we are going to perform is to bring the record values that we are seeing on this table on this pop-up. When the pop-up is pre-populated with the values that are available for the record on the table behind, we'll be able to make the updates on the pop-up and then save the details. Now let's do that. But beforehand, I'll change the width of these columns so that it is more clear to you what we are seeing on the table. On the headers, we just need to add class, and these classes will be according to the ratios that we want to give to a particular column. I'm just mentioning the class name over here, and for the info, let's keep it 3, and for ready to move in, let's keep it 2. I'll just save it and we'll go to the browser. So now this is a much better looking layout and it is more visible to you on the screen for the action column. For this pop-up, what we'll be doing is we'll be using the layout that we have already used for creating the property listing. If you go to this page, post your listing, this is the layout from which we were able to save the data. So while updating the data, we'll require the same layout. And for that, what we'll do is use this existing component in our model pop-up over here on this pop-up. So let's do that. In this model body that we are seeing, where I had earlier mentioned edit pop-up text only, now we'll use create property listing component. Now this create property listing is the existing component over here. This is used for adding the new details into the table. What I want here is it should accept props so that we'll know which particular page we are calling the component from. So I am giving the name over here as source for the props. And why I am doing this? Because I simply want to pass the source over here. So let the source be edit over here. And we have one more file where the component is called from. So over here, I want to mention the source as create. So when we are going through this path, it means that we are trying to create a new data or new entry in the table. And when we are going through this path on this model pop-up, we are trying to edit the record from the screen that is already existing in the table. So this will help the component to differentiate between the sources that it is being called from. I'll just save it here and we'll go to this create property listing.tsx file. So the main reason that I am doing this is to let the component know, and when the components know that it is being called from edit page or create page, I can set the styling also differently, because on the pop-up the styling has to be different. So what we are doing here is we are trying to check if the source is create, then we want to set this class or these classes over here. Otherwise, we are leaving it empty as of now for the create property listing component on this div. And let's use this condition over here also. And here we can give the classes. I'll just mention with 100 text light and background dark. We don't need the border classes, so now I'm saving it. We have mentioned the existing component in our model pop-up and given the sources as well over here on the routes file and in the seller dashboard.tsx. After this, what we'll do is go to the screen. So I click on edit for this record. And you're able to see that we are getting our existing component perfectly on this pop-up. From here, we can make the updates in the record and then just save it. For this particular button, when we are trying to create a new record, we had submit text displayed. So we can use the condition for the source that we have utilized over here on the class name and change the label for the button. Over here, I want it to be submit when the source is create. Otherwise, let's say edit details, or maybe save updates. This can be the second text when we are trying to edit the data. And over here on this radio button option list, let's change the column width and save it. We'll go to the browser again. And now the radio button options are also getting properly displayed. This is also getting displayed according to the edit source that we have. Now if we go to the post your listing page, this is perfect according to the create source that we have for this route. The button here is saying submit only. And if I go to the dashboard and open the pop-up, we are seeing save updates. So this is how we have differentiated between sources and made the conditional operator be in use for displaying the data. After this, what we want to do is pass the record behind to this particular pop-up to edit. So for that, we need to accept the props in this component. We already have accepted source. So let's accept the details that are to be edited. I'll just define the prop over here, edit details of type property listing, and then utilize it over here. But I want to have this particular prop as optional. The reason is I don't want to pass any prop through this file. I only want to pass it through seller dashboard when I am trying to edit. As you see that it is saying that this particular property is missing, and same in the routes.tsx file. So to make it optional, we just have to mention over here. I'll just save it, and you see that currently as it is optional, we don't have to pass it. We'll be passing it over here in seller dashboard. So let's go to seller dashboard, and over here I want to pass edit details. But where do I take the record from? I want to capture the record details from this button. In this particular table, when I am rendering a row, for each row I have a button associated with it. So what I can do is pass the row ID to this function, and then we'll fetch the details of that particular row ID. So I'll just show you how. I am passing row.id over here, and it has to accept also. So we'll go to this function, take ID, and let it be of type any. When we are opening the pop-up model at that time, what we have to do is get that row information. So let's have another state variable for selected row. And let it be set selected row, use state of type property listing. So what I have to do now is I want to first of all fetch the selected row. Const row is equal to property listing result. We already have that data over here. Find row.id, comparing the value with the ID that is received. And once we get that data, what we are trying to do is set that selected row as this record. So over here, we have used the find function to find the data from this result based on the ID that we receive from this particular function. So I'll just save it. And over here on the edit details, we are getting some issue. What we have to do now is we need to pass the edit details. So we'll simply pass the selected row. I'll save it again. Okay, that fixes the issue. Basically, when we are opening the model, we are finding the result from this particular list, and once we have it, we are setting it into our state variable selected row, and that particular row we are passing on this component. So once this component receives that particular record, it has to accept it. But first, let me just show you that how we are simply selecting the record based on the ID. So we'll go over here. I'll open the console. Now over here, I'm trying to edit the 7th record. And now if you see that we have our selected row with all of the correct data that we have for this particular record. So this data is now being passed on to this particular component, that is create property listing. So this component has to accept it now. Let's go to create property listing. We see that we are taking this edit details into the component. Now we need to utilize it as well. So if you remember earlier, what we had done is, this is the state variable that we had created to submit the form data from create property listing component. And this is what we'll need to set the new data also. New data as in the data that we are trying to edit from the new source, which is seller dashboard. Earlier we were using this particular component on this file only, but now we have seller dashboard also, which is referring to create property listing. So we'll be setting the state or the initial values based on the source of the component. So over here, when we are mentioning the initial values, we'll have the source also associated. If the source is comparable to this value, that is create, then we just simply have to set the earlier initial values that we had given. But if it is not, then we need to set the edit details value. So let's use edit details dot property type, and similarly we'll just use for other properties as well. Basically, we don't require any default values that we have mentioned here. We need only edit details value. Property value. Then we have info, contact number, city, action, move in flag. I think this should be good. So basically, we are setting this particular state variable according to the source of this component. If it is create, then have these initial values, but if it is not create, it will be through edit only. So then set the values from the edit details. And now once we have those, what we'll do is we'll need to make some changes over here also. So when we are trying to create the request data that we have for submitting the form to the backend API, over here it will say that string or undefined is not assignable to type string. For this, what we'll do is simply have the use of conditional operator and give blank values as default. But for a boolean variable, we'll give false. And after this, what we'll do is in the radio options, we already have given the name and values, but we'll need to make sure that the correct radio option is selected according to the edit details received. So for that, let's just have check property added, and it should be checked if listing form data dot property action is comparable to cell. So if the edit details have the radio option as cell selected, then this should be checked. Otherwise, we'll have this option checked, and it should be checked when the value is rent out or lease. And the same we'll need to do for our checkbox as well. Listing form data dot move in flag is true, then this checkbox should be checked. And I think this should be it. We should be good here. We are passing the details from this component, capturing it over here, setting the initial data as well. Let's go to the browser again. And over here, now I'm selecting the 7th record where it is studio apartment. This is the value. This is the information from Kolkata, and then we have the contact number, rent out / lease, and ready to move in as no. I'll click on edit, and you see over here that we are capturing the correct information on this particular pop-up. All of the data is selected properly. We have radio option selected as well, and because we have ready to move in as no, the checkbox is not checked. Now we'll have the implementation in place for this button functionality, where we'll be making the updates in the input fields and send the data to our put method on API.